as we've seen now with COVID-19, that are an issue of life and death. One of the most sobering statistics that I've seen in this whole epidemic is that people under 65 years of age with pre-existing conditions, which are virtually all lifestyle and diet-driven conditions, are at as high of risk for hospitalization as people who are over 65 with no pre-existing condition. So if you're a 45-year-old person with type 2 diabetes, you have the same risk of being hospitalized as a 70-year-old or a 75-year-old that doesn't have any of those pre-existing conditions. And if that's not a wake-up call, I don't know what is. Many people who are obese, not everyone, but many people who are obese also have either pre-diabetes or diabetes. And one of the theories right now, this is not proven, there's a lot more research that's needed. Perhaps the main pathological mechanism of COVID is that it interferes with oxygen deliverability, with hemoglobin's ability to deliver oxygen to the cells, is that the ventilator can't necessarily move the oxygen around. That's the job of hemoglobin. And if there's something that's causing hypoxia or lack of oxygen, then a ventilator in that situation wouldn't necessarily help. Different studies have found different results. Diabetes seems to be at the top of the list in most of the studies that I've seen, which was actually surprising, given that this is a severe respiratory illness. I think we would have thought that people with, pre-existing lung conditions would rank at higher risk for. It's not just so much about the lungs themselves, but about the whole body systemic response to the illness. But certainly people with chronic lung disease and including asthma. So some of the younger people who have died from COVID have been people with asthma that were otherwise relatively healthy. They didn't necessarily have diabetes or cardiovascular disease or anything else. They had, and they didn't even necessarily have, fully active asthma, like people who are immunocompromised. So that can include people who've undergone, chemotherapy or cancer treatment, immune deficiencies, prolonged use of corticosteroid drugs, like people with autoimmune diseases who've been taking prednisone or something like that for a long time. Chronic kidney disease, which I mentioned is another major risk factor, and liver disease. Even the CDC has said that severe obesity, with like people with a BMI over 40, is a risk factor. But I think it's likely that it just, regular obesity with a BMI less than 40 could be a risk factor too, especially if it's showing up with diabetes or prediabetes. One of the most important things for sure is to control your blood sugar. So if you're someone who's got pre-diabetic or diabetic level blood sugar, then taking action through diet to lower that blood sugar considerably and get it back into normal range, I would think is probably one of the biggest ROI things you could do. 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night, physical activity, again, that has to be tailored to you based on what your goals are and what's happening for you, stress management. And then I would add a few other things that I think are really critical and often overlooked. So one is social connection. And this is difficult now for us, right, during COVID-19. And I think people are feeling the lack of it in a way that they may have never fully realized. Lack of social connection in one study was shown to be a greater risk factor for early death than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. One of the most mind-blowing studies I've ever seen. But humans are social animals, and when we lack social connection, it has very real, measurable effects, not just on our emotional and psychological well-being, but on our physical health. And then another is spending time outdoors, which again, if you look at it through the ancestral lens, that's something that we lived outdoors 24/7 for most of our evolutionary history. And being outdoors, it relaxes us, it reduces stress. Sunlight produces vitamin D, it increases nitric oxide, which increases blood flow. And it has a regulatory effect on the immune system. So there's so many benefits to being outdoors. And then lastly, cultivating more pleasure. So people often raise their eyebrows when I when I say that, because they think, wait, we live in this hedonistic society that's totally devoted to pleasure. How can you say that? I would disagree with that. I think our society is dedicated to distraction, which is different than pleasure. Pleasure is an experience that's felt in the whole body. When you're fully present and aware of what's going on, there's the release of endorphins happening during pleasure. So surfing is definitely pleasurable. Massage is great. Touch is one of the things that can do that the most, both for me and for everybody else. Sex, dancing, really kind of fully joyful experiences. Listening to music brings a lot of pleasure. All of that's important because it produces chemicals that we need actually to thrive and live well.